I'm excited to present our next speaker for multiple reasons, but let me read this to you, if I can, because the print is extraordinarily small, and I had corrective eye surgery done with 2 implants. Don't do it. Okay. Lupus, I'm going to read this from a former colleague of mine, all right? I'm just sorry that I'm not in this book, so she may have to write another book. Lupus is a life-altering disease. What Sarah Gormen learned is that she could let lupus alter her life, or she could take charge and alter her own life to achieve better control of her lupus. During the struggle that she shares with her readers, she acquired the wisdom to accept that she would live the rest of her life with lupus. She also developed the courage to rebuild her life with lupus by taking charge of what she could control, and she shares that stories. Those elements of wisdom, acceptance, and taking control underlie many of not most of the stories that I hear of successfully living with lupus. And that is why I hope many will read Sarah's story and learn from its meaning message of hope. And this is from Penny Fletcher, who was the president of the Washington chapter, one of my colleagues and mentors for many years. And it is a privilege and a thrill to introduce the author of Despite Lupus by Sarah Gormen. How to live well with a chronic illness, whether it be lupus or any chronic illness. And she flew in, and we're grateful to have you at short notice. So join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here and join you today. Thank you to Suzanne and her team for having me to this conference. From the look of the agenda, I was going to open and say, you guys have received a wealth of information today, and that means that either you're ready to take the lupus world by storm, or you're ready for a nap. And I've heard the word nap thrown around. I heard it in this room. I heard it upstairs in the hallway when I was coming out. So as a lupus patient myself, I get that. I have had lupus for almost 19 years now, and I still remember my very first support group meeting. I went to about 6 months after I'd been diagnosed. And I'll tell you, the sole purpose of me attending that meeting years ago was to prove to my sister and my husband that I did not belong there. I admit it, I was one of those people who thought that a lupus support group was going to be a bunch of complaining, downtrodden, complaining people who had just given up hope. I really did. And if you read any of my book or any of my blog, you know that I have written pages on the value and benefit of support groups. So that's not the end of the story. What happened on that day is I walked into that room, and I'd asked my husband and sister to come with me so I could show them the evidence. I walked into that room, and I saw faces just like my own. I saw people who were still successful and still smiling despite lupus, just like me. I saw people who had successful lives outside of lupus, just like me. And I saw people whose lives had been turned upside down by lupus, but were still trying to move forward, just like me. So all at once, I'd found my happy place. I really had. And I hope you found that today, that there were a lot of people here working toward the same thing. You know, my husband, come on in.
Sorry. Hello, everybody.
That's my seat. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah, I'm just teasing. So my husband and my sister came with me for the next 2 or 3 meetings. But at some point, I finally said, listen, you guys have to stay home because I have work to do. I had work to do. And I think that's why we're all here this weekend, right? Is because there is so much work to be done. There is so much work to cultivate the patients, right? And cultivate the patient voice. Really, it's about inspiring. You're being asked to motivate and empower and build confidence in these patients, right? We're asking them to speak up and use their voice for good, because really, I think the lupus patient voice is really a tool for healing. I truly believe that. And where is that healing going to come? I think it's going to come in the support groups. It's going to come in the navigation sessions that you guys have with new patients. I think it's also going to come in advocacy work, because they're going to be able to find something they're super passionate about and where they can really make a difference. So what we're going to talk about today is how do you inspire those patients, right? And I think we're going to start by talking about courage. And Suzanne, you mentioned in my book, I haven't read that quote in a long time. But we're going to talk about courage, because you're going to remind them that it takes courage to live with lupus. It takes courage to wake up every single morning and put one foot in front of the other, and to face the day knowing what may be in store, right? It also takes courage to acknowledge that this life we're living, and those lupus patients among us can understand, that the life we're living is not really the one we bargained for. And that's big. It takes courage to do that. It also takes courage, and this is a big one too, to realize that you deserve better, right? You're going to have to remind those patients that they deserve to feel better, and that they need to take the steps to do that, to make that happen, whether it's some sacrifices at home, or resetting their schedule, or saying no, that dreaded word, right? Saying no. But it takes courage to do that. It also takes courage to talk about lupus. And that's what I found was a real stumbling block for me. I found that I would get tongue-tied, and I just couldn't get the words to come. And I think lupus patients, I'll speak for myself, most of it was because I just didn't understand. I didn't understand the lingo that comes along with lupus. Anybody understand what I mean? There's a whole vocabulary that belongs to lupus in doctor's appointments. And it's really hard to find the words. It also was difficult, I think, because there was a lot of emotion attached to those words. There was a time where I couldn't even get out the words, lupus is a chronic illness, without tearing up. And I mean, I couldn't even say those words without tearing up. And sometimes they were tears of frustration. Sometimes they were tears of resentment. Sometimes they were out of anger. Sometimes they were just lack of understanding. And so that is my first opportunity that I present to you guys as patient navigators, is that this is your opportunity to transform these patients from tongue-tied, self-conscious, defensive individuals into strong, educated, empowered people who are going to change lives. This is your opportunity. I also think that at any point along a lupus patient's career, I'll call it, they often lose their way, right? There's usually a point at which you think, I have no hope left. And oftentimes they just get to the point where they just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel anymore. They had it, and then they lost it. And the situation is that this is the point. This is your opportunity to remind them that there is hope, and they still do have a voice, and that finding their voice is going to bring back that hope. It really will. So courage is the first thing. So how are we going to do this? We are going to encourage them to be open. We're going to encourage them to be educated, and we're going to encourage them to be prepared. So let's take open for a minute. So when I talk about open, I mean we're going to have to encourage them to talk about their symptoms. And this is coming from a place where I couldn't even say lupus is a chronic illness, and I'm asking them to start talking about their symptoms, because that is the way they're going to get to know lupus and get comfortable talking about it. I'm not going to ask them or suggest that you guys say, list all the symptoms you have. How long would that list be? Right? We're going to pick 3. We're going to encourage them, when they talk about their disease, to pick 3 symptoms. But they're going to be open about it, and they're going to be specific. And they're going to pick examples from their life that explain how lupus affects them. I usually encourage people to just pick the 3 that are the most bothersome at the time, right? Because it's a rotating, they rotate in and out. So let's go with joint pain and fatigue and hair loss. Any lupus patients identify with any of those? Okay, great. Nods all over. Great. So when we talk about fatigue, we're going to say, I don't mean like, gosh, I could have gotten another hour of sleep last night. You know, that is not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about crushing, debilitating fatigue, where you cannot take another step and you literally cannot put words together to make a sentence. That's what we're going to say. That's what we're going to encourage them to say. When we talk about joint pain, I talk about the fact that I couldn't squeeze my toothpaste bottle. I couldn't buckle my own safety belt. And I couldn't even hold my phone to punch the numbers. That is how lupus joint pain affects me. And for hair loss, we're not going to say, there are some hairs on my pillow, or I found some in the shower. We're going to talk about clumps, right, and bald spots. And we're going to explain that most of us, or some of us, have considered getting wigs because the hair loss is so bad. That is what I mean about being open, right? Number 2, educated. So we're going to encourage them to educate themselves. I know my pulmonologist told me when I was diagnosed, he said, I do not want you to go home and Google this. He said, don't do it. And you know what? I listened to him for about 2 months. I let my family take the lead. And that was a really good idea because that was almost 20 years ago. And if you think some information on the internet is bad now, it was awful, right? 20 years ago. But here's the deal. We're going to teach those patients to Google, but not Google too far. Who here has Googled too far? Yeah. You cannot unsee those pictures, can you? Right? And you cannot unread those words. So we're really going to encourage them to Google, but not too far. And that it's okay to get up and step away from the computer when you've read enough. Number 2, I think following the rule of repetition is a really good one. So who here has been at a doctor's appointment and the doctor lays out a treatment or a line of therapy that you're going to follow, and you get to the elevator or you get home and your husband says, so what's the deal? And you have no idea. There's no ability to recount or recall exactly what he said. So the rule of repetition is that if a doctor tells you something, if you can turn around and explain that to someone else, like I said, whether it's a new line of treatment or therapy, if you can repeat it to someone else and explain it, you're good, right? But if you can't, you need to turn right around in that doctor's office and get a better explanation. You can have them write it down, right? But those patients need to leave with understanding, because understanding and education really is empowerment. That's where they're going to be like, I can talk about this because I understand it. So, number 3, and this is really important, we are going to get them prepared. We're going to get them prepared to field the comments and questions that you get about lupus. Who here has had an inappropriate comment or question fired back at them about lupus? Anybody? Yeah, I remember during my first year after I was diagnosed, I was talking with this person and I managed to get out, lupus is a chronic illness, and she said, oh yeah, I know what lupus is. My aunt died earlier this year. Oh my gosh, it just was not what I needed to hear. And day by day, I could probably handle that today, right? Because I am equipped and empowered enough to know what to say, but I did not need to hear that. But newly diagnosed lupus patients need to understand that that's going to happen. But then you guys can joke about it at the support group, right? And try to one-up the most inappropriate comments that you're going to get. I think they also need to be prepared to leave a mark. And this is really important because if they're going to tell their story, they're going to make an impact. I promise you. A perfect example of this, years ago, I was at the grocery store. And you know how they usually ask you if you need help with your groceries? And for years with lupus, I'd always said no, when I needed help more than anybody can ever imagine. And this one day, I decided to say yes. And the kid at the end bagging my groceries was not very much older than I was. I mean, very much younger than I was. But I said yes. So on the way out to the car, I said, I know I don't look like I need help with my groceries right now. I said, but I have this thing called lupus. Do you know anything about it? And he's like, no. And I said, it's an autoimmune disease. It's kind of like rheumatoid arthritis. And I said, right now my entire body is burning. My joints are so sore. I said, I can barely even grip the steering wheel. And I said, I probably shouldn't have even driven here today. I said, my husband's on the other end waiting to help unload the groceries. I said, but you helping me put these groceries in my back seat right now is a huge help, so thank you. And I'm telling you, I guarantee it. I'm not saying he went home and told somebody that night or the next day, but in the future, that kid retold that story. He said, there's this girl, and she totally looks normal, and she looked completely healthy, just like me. But she had this thing called lupus. Maybe it was when Selena Gomez came out and said that she had, a kidney transplant. Tell your story. You're going to leave an impact. So the third is that I think we need to remind these lupus patients that they're going to be part of something big. That's what they need to be prepared for. There are lupus organizations around the world talking about lupus. There are pharma companies. There are healthcare companies. I work with many of them quite often. They are talking about lupus. There are movies, there are books, there are blogs, there are Twitter groups. So they need to be prepared to be part of something big, and they should embrace that idea. So that's all great, right? But I still think patients at some point are going to ask the question, and your guys are going to have to be prepared to help them work through this, which is why? Why me? Right? Why do I have to be the one to do the explaining? Why do I have to clear up this mystery? And I get it. I'm a lupus patient, right? I understand that they are the ones who have to manage the medications. They have to go to the doctor's appointments. They have to juggle the test results. They have to bear the burden of the symptoms, right? I get that. And so why do they have to do it? Why does the patient have to do it? And my answer is pretty simple. And I empower you to use this. The answer is because who better? Who better than the patient themselves to explain exactly what is going on with lupus, to clear up the mystery, to dispel all the myths, right? And to set the record straight. There are so many people out there who do not understand what the symptoms are. But if the patient themselves is going to stand up and say, lupus can affect the kidneys, you bet. Absolutely. Does it cause hair loss? Absolutely. Does it cause people to have to reconsider their positions at work? Absolutely, right? Does it cause issues with childbirth? Absolutely. This is their opportunity to actually clear it up and clear up the mystery. So the other question they're going to get, besides why, is how, right? And we're going to empower them by saying you're going to persevere, and you're going to concentrate, and you're going to embrace. All right, so let's start with concentrate. So we're going to encourage them to concentrate on areas where they can affect change. And this is the real deal. I'm not here, I didn't come out here to find a cure for lupus. I came out here and I do what I do to try to help people live better with lupus, one day at a time. And that's what you guys are going to do. And I really believe it's the little steps, right? The big monumental decisions that I had to make, whether it was cutting off my hair or stepping down from my position at work or taking a new medication, whatever those big decisions are, those are big decisions and they're important. But it's really the daily decisions that we make to live better with lupus. That's where the rebuilding begins. It really is. I came up with a series on my blog. It's called Healthy Deed of the Day. And it's really celebrating those little teeny decisions that you make in order to live better with the disease. Skipping an errand, right, so that you can take a nap. Calling somebody to help with carpool so you don't have to schlep out to get your kid at soccer because you really shouldn't be out dragging yourself out. It's about ordering out dinner instead of making it. It's those little decisions that you can say, you know what, I'm doing this so I can get a little bit better. That's about concentrating on areas where you can affect change. Number two, in order to answer the question, why does it have to be me, and why, you can just say, because you are not going to give up, right? You're going to remind these patients not to be deterred, to persevere. How many of you have met somebody within the last, let's just say 3 months, who hasn't known what lupus was? Yeah. And even if they do know lupus, what do they say? well, I've heard of lupus, but I don't really know what it is. All right, so this is their opportunity. There are still people out there who don't know what it is. You've got to persevere, and we've got to keep those patients talking. I'll give you a perfect example. So years ago, I was on a girls' trip down in Florida. We were waiting for a table, and we had about 30 minutes before our table was ready. And there was another group of gentlemen who was waiting for a table as well. So we all struck up conversations. And the first gentleman asked me, what do I do? And I said, well, I wrote a book, and I travel around the country speaking about it. And he said, oh, what's the book about? And I said, it's about lupus. Do you know what lupus is? And he said, no. And I said, well, it's an autoimmune disease, so it kind of attacks the body. I said, my heart, my lungs, my kidneys are all affected. I've lost my hair a couple times. It really affects every aspect of my life, so on and so forth. You know, it was less than a minute. And you know what he said when I was finished? Oh. That's what his response was. Oh. He couldn't handle it, right? That's fine. You're going to get that, right? You're going to get that. But just wait. Another gentleman, same situation, same 30 minutes. He says, what do you do? And I said, I wrote a book, and I travel around the country speaking about it. And he said, what's the book about? And I said, lupus. I said, do you know anything about lupus? He said, I do. He said, I had a girlfriend in college who had lupus. And he said, wow, she really suffered. She really struggled there for a while. And I said, well, do you know how she's doing now? And he said, no. He said, we didn't keep in touch. He said, but I do remember that one semester she really struggled. That's perseverance, right? You keep telling your story, you're going to hit. Now, you're not even going to believe this third piece, but I promise you, this is an absolutely true story. Same situation, third gentleman. He says, what do you do? And I said, you guys can repeat it back to me. I wrote a book, and I travel around the country speaking about it. And he said, what's the book about? And I said, it's about lupus. I said, do you know anything about lupus? He said, I do. He said, my sister has lupus. And he said, in fact, I was so tired of her struggling with the bottle caps that I came up and created a patented bottle top to prevent her from hurting her joints. And I said, well, I came up with a patented pill organizer to promote adherence and to help with arthritis and to kind of take the drudgery and the stigma out of pill taking. And he said, how about that? And I said, how about that? And that is truly the power of the patient voice. That is the power that we have and those patients have to keep telling that story. So lastly, we're going to ask them to embrace this opportunity. Really, it's an opportunity to affect change at home, at work, at their kids' school, in Congress, right, within themselves. And I'm going to say it, it usually makes me cry when I say it, but it's going to change the way people look at lupus in the future. I have a 9 and 11-year-old, some of you know. They are not going to experience lupus the way I have experienced it. We're going to change that fact. And that's what these patients have the opportunity to do. I hope that by the end, all of your patients are inspired to speak up and use their voice. I hope they are ready to scream up from the rooftops, right? I hope that by the end of this, I am scrambling to corner the market on the patient-generated resources, right? I hope everyone writes a book. I hope they do. I will look forward to that day. So thank you for coming this weekend. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for all you're about to do. You are about to change lives. That's the bottom line. And you are going to do it for the better. And I will leave you with this. This is your opportunity to leave a mark. It really is, right? So I hope you embrace it. So